Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. This video is to bring you a closer look at the Stanley. This is their part number CB1971R. 4.5-inch NRP 630 is what this is. This is a quite commercial grade hinge from Stanley. This is their CB1971R, and what that means is that it's basically it's a half surface hinge. Except that this hinge is a little bit less common in the sense that it is both heavyweight, meaning it's 180 thousandths leaf thickness, and it is non-ferrous. It's completely stainless steel. So this is not an unusual hinge in the sense that half-surface hinges are used when you need to. They're not used in new construction. I mean, I have in my career sold half-surface hinges to a client who was putting in a new door and frame only because he knew he would need a half-surface hinge eventually. But a half-surface hinge is generally used to mitigate damage on a door, a failed weld on the top hinge plate. And we'll talk more about the field uses and where you'll bump into these sorts of hinges later in the video. So the CB1971R is a half-surface hinge. This is what the hinge would look like if we were dealing with a left-hand reverse door when the door is in the closed position. So from your perspective, okay, the door swings out. Okay. My hand here represents the door. This would be the frame leaf. From the exterior, you're going to see the head of the through bolts, which are unfortunately, there are these Phillips drive screws, is what you're going to see from the outside. I would sure prefer that those were a security type fastener, but you're going to see this flathead machine bolt from the exterior. Then on the inside, you'll have this grommet nut. So they're really through bolts and grommet nuts that come with this half-surface hinge. Then you'll have the machine screws listed down, or you can see down in the bottom of the package. That would be for the frame leaf. Okay, now this is an NRP, and that set screw is buried right down in there, so that from the exterior side, you don't see that it is a non-removable pin, nor can you gain access to the head of the set screw. The set screw is there to all but eliminate the driving of the pin out of the hinge so that you can lift that off and remove it. Speaking of that pin, they do include a pin removal tool, and of all the Stanley hinges I've seen, the last couple of orders have included this tool. So that's awfully nice because it's very common to need to drive the pin out, and there's never anything laying around that just works perfectly for driving the pin of a hinge out. But this tool will allow you to do that. You basically get that through the hole in the bottom, and you can just take your hammer, your ball peen hammer, and tap that pin out. Should you need to remove the pin, that's how you would go about doing it. I generally will remove the pin when I'm hanging the door. In the scenario where I am where I'm hanging this door, I'm probably going to want to get the hinges applied to the frame, get the door in the opening, and shim it up and shim it between the stops and make sure my margin at the top is accurate. I would probably use this for a template to mark my locations. I would make sure at that point, once I have my holes marked, that my shimming is correct. And then I would remove the door and drill my holes through the door, and I would do so straight is what I would do. And then I would put the door back in and hang it that way. I would probably just margin it the same way that you would really margin a continuous geared hinge. Okay, so there are different types of hinges: full mortise, full surface, half mortise, half surface. There are variations: swing clear, raised barrel. You can do variations on those hinges based on the mounting type. What I mean to say is you can have a half surface swing clear, you can have a half mortise swing clear, things of that nature. So be mindful that there are different variations. But this is, of the four that I mentioned, full mortise, full surface, half mortise, half surface. The full mortise is the typical hinge. So we won't really talk about that. Just 2 butts are mortised to the edge of the door and frame. The full surface, that's self-explanatory. It surface mounts to the face of the door and frame. Then you have the half mortise and the half surface. So half mortise, half surface. We've got mortise and surface. Those terms apply to what's happening to the door and not the frame. What's happening to the door will be opposite of what's happening to the frame. So if I say that it's half mortise, the leaf that is to the door would be the mortised leaf, and therefore the frame would be the surface leaf. Okay, half surface, which is what this hinge is, the leaf on the door is being surface mounted, and therefore the leaf on the frame is being mortised. So that's how you remember that. Keep it in terms of what's happening to the door itself. Now, this hinge is being used as a replacement retrofit for another manufacturer's hinge. And let me tell you who that is. I just have to look it up in the email thread here. I don't remember who we used this as a replacement on. The client, oh, it was Hager is what it was. Hager, you know, a company whose name is synonymous with hinges. Hager Hinge, they have been since probably the same time as Stanley in the mid-19th century. Hager had discontinued their AB853 hinge, and that's what the client was looking for. It was a bit of a road to walk to find an equal to it. Bomber, who I looked at first, couldn't do it because in a heavyweight they would only do a 5-inch tall. This is 4.5-inch tall. But it's also 3-knuckle. That's the other component to this that I've not mentioned yet. This is a 3-knuckle hinge. Bomber could not do it as a 5-knuckle, and I don't see that they were able to do it as a 3-knuckle either. I spoke to McKinney, and let's see. McKinney, too, did not offer it as a 3-knuckle hinge, so they could do 5-knuckle heavyweight, half surface, as could Bomber, but in a 3-knuckle is what the problem was. And the client, you know, wanted a line-for-line equal to the Hager, which was, you know, heavyweight, 4.5, 3-knuckle, half surface, non-ferrous base material, NRP, and Stanley can do it, and that's this hinge. This client was replacing that Hager hinge. They used those. It is a power generation plant somewhere in the southeastern part of the United States, and you know, these doors are outside. They are hot for 10.5 months a year, and warm for the other month and a half. And non-ferrous is the way that they wanted to go, and not changing anything from a feature perspective is pretty typical. It's typical when you are working with a client who may be in purchasing. So if you've ever sold anything to a defense contractor or to the military or to an installation like a nuclear power plant, if you don't have the exact item that they're asking for, something that is thoroughly equal, completely equal, is not generally acceptable. And you might scratch your head and say, well, why is that? Well, there's no reason that they can tell you that it's not acceptable. It probably is. But because it's not been tested in that environment, for whatever the reason, for whatever they're testing for, compatibility with the environment, and I don't mean the humidity or the temperature, I just mean in the ecology in which it's being used, it's inherently not acceptable. And generally you'll have a problem where the client that you're dealing with doesn't have the ability to request a variance, a deviation from the part number. Testing has to be done, submittals have to be created, approvals have to be reviewed and generated, you know, engineers are involved, etc. So in this case, while it's not Hager but Stanley, it met all of the other requirements, and these were exterior rooftop doors, whatever, you know, so you know, they were not critical to, you know, to the process of what's happening there. Nor is that installation a critical sort of security environment. it was not a problem for the client to agree to it basically having a different name on the hinge altogether. So thankfully Stanley still makes this, this hinge. So let's take a look at the screen view now and review the supporting documentation for this item. So we have some photographs here that you'll, by the time you're seeing this video, will be uploaded to the order profile. And what we're looking at here is, this is what you would see when the door's in the closed position, just in an elevation perspective. A right side view of that same hinge, a hinge from the back of that installation, and then a left side view from the back of the frame, a plan view, or a cross-section type view. Shims are included. We'll talk about those at the end of the video. The screws and then that pin removal tool. And then a little closer shot of the screw package. Now here's the hinge that we're working on. Okay. Now there are two links below this video. One is to the template and the cut sheet. Let's look at the cut sheet first. And this is going to tell us 3-knuckle half surface hinge, heavyweight concealed bearing lifespan, they call it. So this is of a concealed bearing sort of perspective. Construction, I mean. 3-bearing type of construction. Concealed life stand bearing for trouble-free, long life, no oil, no grease, no maintenance. A very smooth operating hinge as a result of this design, and is known to be approximately 20% more effective at carrying the load as to what you would see in a typical exposed bearing sort of hinge construction. Just a typical ball bearing 5-knuckle hinge would have exposed bearings. But when you get into 2-knuckle and 3-knuckle hinges, and you can in 5-knuckle hinges as well, it's very normal to see a concealed bearing type of construction. That's because if someone's asking for 3-knuckle, it's very likely they're doing so, or 2-knuckle, it's very likely they're doing so for aesthetic purposes. The bottom line is a 3-knuckle hinge is a cleaner look than a 5-knuckle hinge. It just is. I think it is. In my opinion, it is. As is a 2-knuckle hinge. So why would we interrupt that view with having exposed bearing raceways? They would have concealed bearing construction as standard for a 3-knuckle or 2-knuckle hinge. I can't think I've never seen a 3 or 2-knuckle hinge that has exposed bearings. There may be a 3-knuckle, but I can't think of one. So we're dealing with the CB1971R, which is available in stainless steel base material in either a polished or a satin finish. We're doing 630. That means two things. It's made of solid stainless, and it is in a brushed finish. The absolute most durable finish of all of the finishes available. And all of the finishes available, if we click on Contact Us, Video Gallery of all places, currently scroll down to page 2, and if we go to we do a find function for BHMA finish chart, of all of the finishes that are available, there must be, who knows how many here. There must be 80 of them here. Of all the finishes available, the most durable of all is 32D or 630. So if you're looking for the most durable finish, period, and that's called a natural finish. There's no plating, there's no process over it, there's no lacquer, nothing's been done to it, except that it's gone through a brushing sort of finish. And they will literally use a tool that will put a mild brush on this. It's a wire wheel, basically, is what it is. It's a lot of hand labor doing it. I've never been to the Stanley factory because it's in Asia. Although this box does not, the box doesn't say made in China, but the bill of lading when they arrived definitely did. So let's go through the details. For heavy or high-frequency wood or mineral core doors with edge rails that won't hold screws, hung on hollow metal frames. So a heavyweight hinge is when you're going to use a heavyweight hinge when you have a high volume application or a door that's heavier than average. You have to be sure that your frame is prepped for a leaf that's 180 thousandths thick, because if it's not, this would be the wrong hinge. But generally, half-surface hinges are used, they're called into the application when you have damage. Edge rails that won't hold screws, or a hinge reinforcing plate whose welds have broken and that plate fell down into the door and that's where it'll stay. Size 6-inch recommended for lead line doors not exceeding 250 pounds. Well, that would be a 32nd of an inch lead door. That's a pretty small lead, but you'll see that in a dental office where there's not a tremendous amount of x-ray being produced. Concealed lifespan bearing, trouble-free, long life. We talked about this. No oil, no grease, no maintenance. Heavyweight gauges increase available bearing surface area for maximum friction reduction. So the larger the surface area, the less friction that you will have. It's like in low voltage when you have a certain amount of distance that you need to go from point A to point B. When you use a thicker wire, you will be able to increase that distance because the amount of wire reduces the impedance of the flow of electricity through it. So it might be initially counterintuitive, but more of something reduces the friction or the the overall transfer of the electricity through the medium. Pins and non-ferrous hinges are stainless steel, so this hinge is thoroughly stainless. I don't know if that set screw is stainless. Well, hard to say. I don't know if the NRP set screw is stainless, but I would think that it is. It shouldn't be a problem getting stainless steel set screws. Reversible flush tips and pins. A flush tip is also a hallmark of a 3 or a 2-knuckle hinge. When you're looking for a clean look, you're not going to have a button tip on here. Hinges can be furnished with hospital tips. That's where they'll grind the top of the hinge down so that it all but eliminates you from looping or hanging something on this. That's done so that people can't harm themselves. Ligature resistant is what a hospital tip would be called. Consider a backing plate with these hinges. So what they're saying with a backing plate is, in a backing plate you will have, in a backing plate is nothing other than a piece of metal that has the holes drilled in it that it will match up with the hinge. So in your application, and I would absolutely endorse backing plates, and they can be purchased. We're going to have our hinge here, okay? The leaf comes across here. You're going to have your door sit in here. Those bolts are going to go through the door, right? You'll have your grommet cap here. There'll be 2 of them. Well, there'll be 3. But that backing plate would mount right to the inside here and give you better surface area so that when you tighten down the bolts, you're not crushing the door, and give you just a better installation of the weight of the door being carried better because you have a plate on the opposite side of this. Okay, so that's what the backing plate is for. Let's see if we can find a backing plate in their catalog, and I don't see one. Yeah, I would think Stanley has to manufacture one. I do not see one in the Stanley catalog, but to give you an idea, we'll skip over to the McKinney catalog. This is what a backing plate would look like, and your quantity of holes would match the leaf that so this wouldn't match a Stanley because it has it's the wrong size plate they're showing, but the BP-10 we would have to confirm that per the template that the holes are in the right location, but this is what a backing plate does, and can ultimately be ordered. I would absolutely recommend it when you're installing these. Lifespan limited lifetime warranty. I've never had anyone have a warranty claim on a Stanley concealed bearing hinge. Available with exposed tips. I don't see an example of an exposed tip here, which is just basically going to give you the look of a, you know, a typical hinge. I've never had anyone order an exposed tip with this either. It would be just for aesthetics, would be my opinion. Packed with machine screws and grommet nuts. Okay, so that's the overview of this hinge. Now here are the sizes: 4.5, 5, and 6 only. Sometimes you get a call for a 4-inch hinge. Not unheard of. I would pretty sure we can get you a 4-inch half surface hinge. You have to do a little research. You'll notice that this is 180 thousandths, which is the heavyweight, and how the gauge changes as the height changes. Okay. They give you some basic dimensional properties here, but for that, let's switch over to the template, which is also linked to down below this video. There's no date on that drawing, but that drawing's probably decades old. This will show you the location, obviously, of all of the holes for the screws for both the door leaf and the frame leaf. This is what the hinge looks like when the door is open at 90 degrees. Your door would sit in this area here. And then this chart down below will give you those same A and C dimensions. Now, the B dimension, center line of the pin to the edge of the leaf, that might be nice to know. Well, it would be very nice to know, because you're going to want to confirm that you don't have a conflict with, who knows, maybe the width of the stile, if for some reason you're putting this on an aluminum storefront door. So that B dimension on our 4.5-inch hinge is 2 9/16. So that's important to know. If you've got an 1.5-inch style aluminum door, this hinge will not work, or won't fit anyway. So that is nice to know. The offset, the C dimension, is 5/8 of an inch. And that's important to know, because you're going to want to make sure, if you're using this hinge with other existing hinges, that vertical axis of pivoting is maintained with the mix and match procedure. You would not use this with standard weight hinges and vice versa. You could use it with full mortise heavyweight hinges, so if you needed one at the top only, you could do that. But that dimension is provided there for you. And they also provided the C dimension here. The A dimension is the width of the leaf. I can't think of a great reason for you to know that if it's going into a hollow metal frame that's prepped for a 4.5-inch tall 180 thousandths hinge. But if it's a channel iron frame, for some reason you might want to know that A dimension, the width of that jam leaf to the center, the vertical axis of pivoting. So very handy to know all of these dimensions. If you're replacing a hinge, sure, definitely double check to make sure. Now, one thing that we did in check, just to be sure, the location of the holes for the door leaf, because they were replacing Hager 853, AB 853s. If we take a look at the Hager template, 1/2 inch, 1 3/4, 1 3/4, and then we're at 9/16, an 1.5 from the edge. 1.5, well, they don't list it from the edge, but we can determine that. So I had said that a little too quickly. It's an 1.5 from the vertical axis of pivoting, and then 9/16 over. And when we take a look at the Hager template, which is here, same dimensions, 2 9/16, width of the leaf, 1.5, and then 9/16. So everything matched up just fine for that. So there would be no need to re-drill holes, thankfully. But when you're changing hinges, when you are using a hinge that's not identical, checking installation instructions, checking templates and locations of fasteners is always part of the process of determining compatibility. Okay. Now let's switch back to the screen view. But before we do that, I did want to point out to you the link here to the manufacturer's page. That will allow you to review not only all of the Stanley products that we sell, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the product catalog. And the one that I like to use is a pre-Dormakaba merger type catalog, just because I'm used to it, the 2010 Stanley Architectural Hardware Catalog. This document is an encyclopedia when it comes to hinges. And if you deal with hinges, commercial hinges, reading the introductory general hinge information section is required reading, because it will teach you all about the different types of hinges that you're going to potentially encounter, how they work, when they're used, what their options are, how to apply them, what sort of things you should expect to ask when you're talking to a customer about these types of hinges. And this chart here is really helpful, which is on page 12, and goes through those standard hinges. We talked about full mortise, full mortise, full surface, half mortise, half surface, and then variations: swing clear, anchor hinges, raised barrel, cam lift, all sorts of different types of items. So reading this would be really required information. There's a raised barrel hinge. Let's move back to the camera view and wrap up this video. Now, when does someone ask for a half-surface hinge? Well, someone asks for a half-surface hinge in almost all instances when they have a problem with an existing hinge. Steel door, steel frame, standard caliber material, 18 gauge, standard introductory, quality door, not beveled, welded seamless edges, heavier gauge, things of that nature. What happens is this: the top hinge, that hinge holds 70% of the weight of the door. If any hinge is going to break, it will be the top hinge. I have seen the bottom hinge break as well. That's for a different reason. The reason I figure is rain will collect, come down the face of the wall, get into the top of the door, run down through the door itself, and it will collect and pool at the bottom. So water sits at the bottom of that door where that bottom hinge is located near. And you'll see weep holes in the bottom of a door in the inverted channel. That's to allow the water to get out. And you'll also see welded top channels as well to keep it out of there in the first place. So bottom hinges will break, but by and large, it's the top hinge. That's just because of the work that it's doing. So it's very common for a client to come in and say, yeah, I need a new door. Why? Well, the top hinge broke. Okay, I can sell you a new door, but here's an option. An option would be a full surface continuous hinge, a reinforcing surface pivot, or a half surface hinge. Now, some people don't like half surface hinges, and I agree, because it's a lot of hardware that you see. It's quite a departure from seeing just the knuckle of the hinge when the door is closed. So the downside of a half surface is you can see that. The other downside is those screws are definitely exposed, and that's I'm going to say that that's a 1/4 bolt. So I would be mindful to consider a security bolt, and I will look in the catalog and see if there's any options for that. I would imagine getting a pin Torx or some sort of a one-way screw, which you don't want to use, but some sort of a Torx or a pin Torx or some other security screw would certainly be an option in a 1/4 flathead stove bolt. So when you talk about how to repair this broken door, a half surface hinge is quite an option, even given its two disadvantages. The advantage is that it's easy to install and it's really inexpensive. So as far as I'm concerned, it's low-hanging fruit. If you consider a half surface hinge versus the continuous hinge option, same problem. You're slapping a big hinge on the outside of the door. So if you're going to see additional hardware, there's such a big difference in that. And then in some cases, when the client has that broken top hinge, they'll literally, they do just want a new door, because they figure that the rest of the hinges will break eventually. Maybe. You might even also be able to repair that door. I have seen new construction in a national chain, a fast food restaurant chain, where they have a small structure with or without a roof, I forget, that has metal doors on it that conceals their dumpsters. Those doors they have on reinforcing pivots. Same concept as a half surface hinge. In new construction, they know from practice that they'll have a problem with that top hinge. And they will, because it's a standard caliber door with an 18 gauge door, 18 gauge thick steel door. There's only so much welding you can do to that much thicker hinge plate before you have a problem with the thinner 18 gauge. So the projection of the weld is according to the thickness of the material when they're spot welding those parts on. or however they're welding them. So when you've got one hinge doing 70% of the work, basically, that's the hinge that's going to break. So be mindful, though. You can mix and match this with a full mortise hinge, but not standard and heavyweight in that environment. So you can certainly replace just one of these hinges. Now, the other types of hinges, it's very common to see a half mortise hinge where you'll have the leaf, not very common, but relatively common, where you'll have the leaf mortise to the edge of the door and then surface mounted to the face of the frame. You could have the same reasoning that has brought you to this half mortise hinge. The hinge plate in the frame has broken. That happens as well. It's generally the door that breaks because the door is what's taking the force directly initially. But half mortise hinges are used in channel iron frames as well, where there's no mortise to prep to, but there is in your door. Really nice quality hinge, really nice smooth operation. I'm a fan of Stanley, and it's because of the fit and finish. I'm just always pleased with when I see it. Now they also, I had talked about the screw package, the hinge removal tool. Stanley hinges always include shims. The shims, you can also buy these in a box of 100. They're sold separately, and shims are used to just help you tip the door to where you need it to go, move it in the opening. Not for use on fire-rated doors. You can't use cardboard shims. You must use steel shims when it comes to shimming a fire-rated door. But it's nice that Stanley includes those because most manufacturers simply don't, and it's very typical to need the assistance of a shim every once in a while. So if you're working with hinges and you do Stanley and you get these, save these, keep them in a dry area. They're awfully handy. They're perforated and ready to go, just not for use on fire doors. They also act as a way to insulate the hinges from each other when they ship from the factory. Now, that link to that catalog that's down below, I cannot more strongly urge that you review that if hinges are a relatively new concept to you, because it's that catalog, and there's another manufacturer that I can think of, PBB. They have a nice general information section, so read as much as you can possibly about it so that you can understand what's happening with the different types of hinges, because these are specialty hinges. Half surface hinge, it's a specialty hinge. You don't sell that normally, and you don't with new construction. If you have any questions on the CB1971R in a 4.5-inch size, and that's the height of the hinge, in an NRP non-removable pin, obviously a half surface hinge is going to be almost always on an exterior door that swings out. Hand in hand with that application would go the NRP specification, and it would be very unusual to sell a half surface hinge that's not NRP or some sort of security measure. And then 630 or 32D solid stainless steel brushed finish. Any questions on this or any other Stanley product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.